We all love media, even you. The very fact that you're watching this video proves that. Our innate desire for knowledge, our love of entertainment, and the way music, video games, and books offer us a sense of fulfillment is a testament to our love affair with information. But, as we know, not all media is positive. So how do we address the media which reminds us of the negative aspects of our love-hate relationship with it? Let's discuss. They've been around in one form or another for thousands of years. As far as we can tell, the first bulletins were posted in ancient Rome. Government news sheets were published during the Han Dynasty in ancient China, and during the Renaissance, the same kind of information bulletins were used. But the first actual newspaper didn't appear until around 1620 with the advent of the printing press. These papers were rarely objective. Journalistic objectivity is a far more recent concept, but unfortunately one that is very easily subverted. The modern conversation of journalistic ethics, if you ask Google, is primarily surrounding the topic of games journalism, likely owing to Gamergate. A search on the history of corrupt journalism reveals that the majority of the search results are centered around games journalism. And that's definitely an issue that bears our scrutiny, but it's by no means limited to that. The term yellow journalism comes to mind. It references a form of journalism that presented little to no well-researched or legitimate information to the reading public, referencing a trend in the early 1900s in which newspapers relied more on eye-catching headlines in order to sell newspapers. Many of these stories included blatant exaggeration of events, scandal-mongering, and sensationalism. Unfortunately, this trend has continued into the modern day. The only difference is that now, in the digital era, we refer to this practice as clickbait. Now, I'm sure off the top of your head, you can think of some egregious examples. Even I myself fell victim to this. About 15 years ago, a group of my friends and I had our pictures appear in a newspaper under the headline, "Suspects Arrested in a Hostage Situation." The headline was a complete fabrication. In reality, we had been evacuated from my friend's house due to a hostage situation taking place next door. We were escorted away by a police emergency response team. We were neither suspects, nor were we under arrest. No corrections or apologies were ever made, despite the fact that we brought it up to the newspaper. There's numerous examples of outrageous claims made by journalists, in some cases entirely fictitious. In 1998, Stephen Glass, a journalist with the New Republic, had 41 articles to his name. It was discovered that at least 27 of them had been fabricated, and in some cases, Glass had gone out of his way to create fake websites for companies that didn't even exist. The story was later dramatized in the 2003 film Shattered Glass, which was actually a pretty good movie, and I suggest you check it out for some insight. Even today, the trend continues in numerous ways. A good example of this is the recent spate of cases in which a journalist is seeking out the juiciest rape story they can find. As a result, they often find themselves either complicit in fabrications or unwilling to dig in order to ensure the case is even legitimate, such as the case of Rolling Stone's UVA case. In others, many journalists insist that the cases are entirely true, such as the Duke Lacrosse case, and even more recently, the Jian Ghomeshi trial, where even after he was found to be not guilty, some journalists, particularly with the Canadian Broadcasting Company, still assert his guilt despite his being found not guilty. Unfortunately, this is a bit of a trend with the CBC. A few months ago, when Toronto artist Gregory Allen Elliott was found not guilty of allegedly harassing feminist political activist Stephanie Guthrie by doing no more than disagree with her behavior over Twitter, a CBC journalist took the time to remind people that being found not guilty did not mean he was innocent. After 3 years of being banned from the internet, which was, as I understand it, his main source of income, he is still being labeled an abuser, despite being found not guilty. The Gamergate controversy was another such example that I've already spoken of at length. Of particular note is Gawker Media, who, after being the target of Gamergate supporters angry at being mischaracterized by them in other publications, launched an email campaign to their advertisers. Gawker reported a 7-figure loss due to the Gamergate campaign and quickly took to doubling down on their narrative about Gamergate, going so far as to call them misogynists, white males, and dishonest fascists, none of which are objectively true to the whole. But there's a very real and alarming presence of sensationalism in the media that sickens many people. Lives are often destroyed, and so long as the lies told by media are unfalsifiable, they cannot be held accountable for their dishonesty unless they royally screw up. Thankfully, Gawker recently did so when they were brought to court by former wrestler Hulk Hogan, who sued them after they refused a judge's order to remove a sex tape featuring the wrestler and the wife of a friend engaging in intercourse, which appeared to be entirely consensual, and even the tape itself suggested that Hulk's friend had consented to the Hulkster banging his wife. Hulk won the case to the tune of a cool $140 million, almost $55 million more than the worth of Gawker Media, who, after being sued by their own insurance company, had reportedly run out of liability insurance, meaning the money would have to be paid out of pocket. There comes a time when the admission must be made that our current model of media in what is and isn't newsworthy and the methods of reporting within these companies must be set to an inquisition. The problem is, as it is with everything, money. Most people assume that newspapers and online publications write for the reader. They assume that the reader is the customer base. This is categorically incorrect. The advertisers represent the customer base. You, the reader, are the product they sell. So in order to draw in readers, they often resort to dirty, underhanded tricks. They rely heavily on the most sensational headlines to collect your clicks and sell your impressions on their pages to the highest bidder. While this is a good model monetarily speaking, it does nothing to lend to accountability, ethics, or honesty, despite the best efforts of groups such as the Society of Professional Journalists, who have prepared and presented detailed ethical guidelines for journalists. But these guidelines are optional and by no means mandatory. So how do we fix it? One possible answer is to shift over to a paid subscription model. This would again make the readers the customers and not the product. This would encourage newspapers and websites to be held accountable to their readers and not to their advertisers. And of course, it would work for those who are willing to support an organization monetarily, but even then, headlines would often be written to appeal to the reader demographic. And again, we would run into the same problem of publications writing biased pieces to appeal to those of a particular religious, political, or gender ideology. The truth is that I don't even know what the best model for encouraging objectivity and enforcing an ethical code that doesn't victimize innocent people for the sake of selling advertising or appealing to particular ideologies would be. But I will say this. The rise of services like YouTube has given power to the public that they've never really been able to tap into before. And there comes a point where I'm more willing to trust the independent YouTuber than the big-name journalist working for an international publication. A journalist's paycheck is often dependent on their adherence to their boss's wishes. A YouTuber with a Patreon is beholden to nobody but his own sense of honesty, at least in theory. The point being is that a YouTuber might be incorrect on the information, but he or she will often take the time to find out as much as they can. Our current model of journalism simply doesn't allow for that, especially with the prevalence of popular blogs utilizing yellow journalism or clickbait masquerading as legitimate journalism, such as Gawker or Celine. I'm all for freedom of expression, and I'm entirely for freedom of speech. I believe everyone deserves the right to speak their minds, no matter how wrong they might be, because that same platform can be used to refute or debunk them. But the question of media ethics is a complicated one. Should media be held to a higher standard than private citizens? There's a site called Deep Freeze that's been collating information on ethical violations committed by journalists connected to the Gamergate controversy. While a great idea in the context of Gamergate, I feel that it might be prudent to create an organization or a media watchdog of sorts that investigates, publishes, and holds journalists accountable for non-adherence to the ethical principles presented by, say, the Society of Professional Journalists. Unfortunately, the question then becomes, how do we ensure your average reader is aware of it and is willing to take the time to do their own research on the journalists they follow? How would such a site function? How would it be constructed? Who would manage it? And how do we enforce true objectivity among the managers on the site? The problem then shifts away from a media issue to a human nature issue. So there's some food for thought. Thanks for listening today, and be sure to leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you like what you've heard today, drop me some love, and be sure to subscribe.